only screen memories are something that can be induced from other places, but from people here on Earth. I was talking to a very well-known, not terribly well-known, person who reported a UFO experience on the East Coast. And in hypnosis session, I said, well, what do they look like? Oh, they're one of the little grays, she said. And then I used a technique that's familiar to psychologists in asking her, what did her eyes see? What was her primary sensory impression? What did she really see with her eyes? Not what she remembered. Oh, they're not gray. And they're not 3.5 feet tall. They look this, they look that. And pretty soon it became evident to me that she was describing Group I, a group that I'm fairly familiar with. So she had brought into her hypnotics regression, even the one that I had was conducting, a picture in her mind that she had confabulated with what had actually been going on. Now, all kinds of people bring all kinds of fears, angers, frustrations, early childhood trauma, all kinds of things to a hypnotic session. And it's so easy for them to confabulate those things with what's going on that it's not necessarily of any extraterrestrial origin, because it's happening later, considerably later. Now, I'm glad that Dr. Turner brought up the reptilians. It's the same people that I know about it, but I have many people who have told me, some of them from first-hand experience, that this is the very group that Dr. Boylan has been investigating and looking into, that have had some kind of collaborative interest with the U.S. government. This seems pretty sinister, and many people won't believe that. And I'm not sure whether I believe it at all. But that is the group. That is the group that's been associated with the Area 51 government operation. Not necessarily very good people at all.
Okay, your question, Jim? You're up for a question.
I used up my time here on the question, so I just commented rather than asking the question.
All right, but you're allowed to comment on the prior question and still ask one.
I'll pass it. Okay, so Charles.
I'd like to address this to really all three of the panel and maybe giving me a show of hands on this. I would like to start out, though, by actually retracting what I said about a while ago, them having non-emotions. I was talking to Dr. Hart about that. Seemingly so many of them do not have emotions to start with, and seemingly that's what they want to contact and watch us for. They seem to have a beautiful experience of learning these emotions from us, again, because they feel that they have lost something. I had one woman come out of hypnosis the other day, making mental contact and whatever, and she had the most beautiful, sweet smile on her face I think I've ever witnessed on a human being. She turned around to me and said, I have never felt such love emanating from a human being in my life. But like a couple of these ladies, I haven't experienced so much of this negative stuff. I know it exists, and I'm sure it does, and I'm glad I don't experience this. I look too much to the negative side, to the spiritual side of it. Maybe I have got a mindset. But I state this several times, if I have a mindset and I've been accused of leading questions, and I plead guilty. But when I ask these aliens, if I do ask them a leading question, they will not let me lead them nowhere. When I'm wrong, they just tell me flat, that ain't it. They will not let me lead them nowhere, or even if I try to. So it really doesn't matter. What I found out, my basic question is, I'd like to address it to all three, see how many, if any, has experienced this. I've been told many times that there's something up there like an interplanetary council. Anyone coming into this atmosphere, solar system, whatever, they have to be cleared by the interplanetary council, and they themselves tell me that they try to keep negative ones out of here. They say their own selves that they know that they are not 100% accurate themselves, and they do get through sometimes. But my main question to all three and Dr. Harder, have y'all experienced this in a planetary council thing?
Have we experienced it or have we been told about it?
Both, or either. I told about it.
The number 57, I didn't say anything about until about 3 years ago, but I had heard it from a number of independent people who were, in a sense, speaking for some extraterrestrial information, who didn't know each other. And when it got past 3, I decided there was some, and that other people had told me this number. I decided there was some validity to the 57. It really doesn't matter that much, though. What's interesting is that it's such a large number. Whether it's 57 or 87 or 27, it's a very large number. And it represents a tremendous pool from which a lot of different people. And in addition to that, there are about 17 groups that have gotten so far that they don't even use spacecraft anymore. That's very hard to believe so for some people. And then there are scores of people who are even below that, who are not even, who are not members of the Federation, and they're here too. And in a sense, there's a way, well, it's, as long as they don't do too many really bad things to humans, they have their say too. I think some people that I know are trying to make some kind of appeal to have some Federation action taken against some of the worst of these things that are happening. And they may be successful, I hope so.
We have cases that have been told about this, but being told is no sign that it's true. Even though they've been told, several people unrelated have been told the same things. You can be told a lot of things, that doesn't mean they're true.
I'm writing a 4th book now. It's called Opening the Closed Door. And one of the cases in that will be of a person who saw me, a scientist with syntax, who surprisingly found a past life in which he was an alien coming to the planet Earth in its early stages in order to educate people. And even though he may not have been part of this confederation, I didn't ask that question. We were just doing an aggression. He was obviously on a mission here of teaching the primitive people ways of bettering their civilization. He was obviously a very good person in that civilization. It's a fascinating account. I hope my readers find it fascinating. But if there is a confederation, it would honestly be part of it because his motives were the highest, and the whole society's motives were the highest.
In my research, I don't have any information about a confederation. Doesn't mean it exists or doesn't exist, just that no one has reported it as such as an implied governmental or other compact. The closest I've heard to that is that certain extraterrestrials have informed the person they were communicating with that there is a coordination of effort among a number of races in the work of making their presence known on Earth. So coordination is the most I can speak to that.
Richard, your question?
This one would be for Dr. Fiore. I'd like to ask you if, I think you alluded to this, but maybe go into a little bit more. I think your collected kind of model case had to do with the 3.5-foot tall gray-skinned individual. Could you say a bit more about the variety of races that you've encountered, if there have been more?
All right. First of all, I'd like to say that you realize, of course, that I'm a clinician, about 95%, and researcher 5%. So that if something just happens to come out fine, I don't ask questions about it because we're working against the clock and we're trying to heal the problem. But in the course of doing this work, the most common are the grays. There is usually a taller being in the ship. That being has not been described not in the ship. In other words, it's always within the ship itself. who is supervising matters, who seems to be much more human. Then there are some who are completely and totally human. In other words, they're just as human as you are, and indistinguishable. And my guess, and it's only a guess, is that this person has been created by the male and female eggs, put together and then brought up in their culture. Then there are the reptilian ones. Then there are blue ones, blue beings. And I don't have much more of a description except they are blue. And then there's actually, this may be described by the experiencer that I brought, a black one. And it was not a Negro race, but a black one. And let's see what else. That's about it. I haven't gotten into the Nordic ones. I've had, of course I read about that, but I haven't had that come up in my practice.
Edith, your question?
I'm going to pass on the question.
Okay. Dr. Kern?
Yes, I'd like to follow up on this question. And I wanted to ask Dr. Boylan and also Dr. Harder the same sort of question. What variety of species are you having reported? And are we perhaps talking about the tall one in charge of the ship being the one that so many people call insectoid or in its physical appearance? And have any of you encountered the tall, completely human-looking, dark widow-peaked being?
I'm a little flat-footed here. I'm going to have to do this in memory. I always have meant to collect all the descriptions and catalog by racial type, but a lot of time pressure. So as good as memory serves, I'll have to do here. First of all, I think gray should be eliminated as a term. I think it leads to confusion because I have heard described 3.5 to 4 foot tall grays, 5 to 6 foot tall, 7 to 8 foot tall. Heard of people with mushroom white skin and grayish tones, sepia brown, and I think it may be an artifact of lighting and background as to whether these are all different skin colors or variations on a base color. Eye configurations, the large black almond up, the large black almond straight horizontal wraparound, ovoid black eyes, cat slit eyes, yellow, pupil slit-like, praying mantis type figures, not the literal bug, but a very thin, kind of characteristically posed figure that particular analogy leads to mind for more than a few experiencers. I've run across the black-skinned individual who in other ways may resemble the so-called gray to a degree. What some people choose to call reptoids, which run a range of folks with a kind of greenish-white, fine scaly quality to skin. Facial features tend to come down a bit with more of a, I wouldn't say snout, but more of a protrusion out from the face than the classical gray with 2 nostril holes in the slit. Humanoid types, but in almost, I've never run across a Nordic that I believed. I believe Nordics may well represent a cloak memory. I could be wrong on that, but the few white Anglo-Saxon, I don't know if they're Protestants, but that I run across, I asked the person, now, I want you to really notice detail here. I want you to peer intently at that person and tell me exactly what you notice. I hope that's relatively non-leading. And in every case, it penetrated through to a so-called gray or some other extraterrestrial figure. I can't tell you Nordics don't exist, or as Edith is talking about, perhaps some folks that would pass, in the back of an alley of a bar at 2 in the morning for a human, but I have not particularly run across carbon copy humans that survived the penetration stare test. cloaking does go on. I think calling it deception is an interpretation of motive. In my experience, I've seen the cloaking go for purposes of humanity. Little kids were shown an angel or a Jesus figure, and later on they could penetrate through the true nature of the being when they were under hypnosis in a supportive setting. People have seen a gray, and upon closer examination it turned out to be a reptoid, more like figure, so that now that we're getting a little sophisticated, some of the extraterrestrial figures, well, you'll believe a gray. Can I sell you a gray? Actually, their appearance is a little more bizarre, and they want to let you down the primrose path gradually. So those are the variations that come to mind right off the top.
Do you mind if I just answer your question, even though you didn't direct it? I just remembered two more things. In my book, in one of the chapters, the person who looked like a gray, when they went into a certain chamber, they moved through kind of like a suit that just stayed. In other words, they slipped into this tight-fitting suit. And the eyes were really goggles to protect them from light. And the gray was just a very, very tight, practically like skin-like bodysuit, but underneath they had kind of like a crinkly brown skin, so I just remembered that. Also, when you mentioned praying mantis, a lot of people do see praying mantises. And another thing that happens is I see it as not a screen memory imposed upon the person by the aliens, but by our own defense mechanisms. This is something we learned about in psychology, that, for instance, and I see it all the time, like the sexual abuse, it may be a stranger who has done it, and then upon closer examination, it's a family member. That's just a defense mechanism of the mind. This automatically is the screen memory like the owl. So I don't think, we don't know whether that's coming from the aliens or from their own mind. But anyway, I'd just like to conclude at this point.
I'll just add a few things to which is Dr. Boylan's description. There are I have an alphabetical list. There's the W group, the A, B, C's, there's the F's, the I's, the H's, and they'll go by how many fingers they have. That's very, because on people when you have to count, the people have just kind of like a mitt. Other people have 6 fingers on each hand, 6 fingers on each foot. They're really not feet, they're just 2 extra hands. And they float, so they don't have to stand on anything. And when they bring all 24 of those fingers to work, and the fingers not only fold this way, but they fold the other way too. A fantastic ability to do surgery. That's a group that are not even based on water as a fluid system. They're based on the gases. I think that there's some really fantastic possibilities out there. And then there's another group, we call them the T group. They don't have hands, eyes, ears, or any sensory input except psychic. That's their only input to the outside world is parapsychological.
Are they the balls of light?
That's another group that appear to be balls of light, and they don't even have a physical body that's visible. And there are about 17 of those, and appear in different places. So you can see the enormous variety. Given, say, 100 or 1 billion years of evolution, could be achieved.
Well, they don't even need that evolution, because when someone dies in this world, sometimes they are seen as a ball of light afterward. They bounce around the room, or they present themselves as a ball of light, and their personality. And the person who sees it usually knows that that's their mother or whoever.
Charles, did you want to comment on that question just a touch?
Yes, I wanted to make it more as asking a question, I guess, to the whole group. I find so many of these people lately that fit in the category, easiest I know how to explain it, is most everybody here has probably read Ruth Montgomery's book, Walk-Ins. Of course, like I was speaking to Wendell Stevens and Lee Bob here last night, and this book come out, seemingly walk-ins got real popular, and we find a lot of them. But walk-ins basically were Ruth Montgomery, I think, was a spirit type situation, but it also fit into the alien field, and of all things, right out there in the hall last night, everything was hypnotized her right behind the book counter where they're selling the books. She's fitting this field of what I call walk-ins, and in a way they're alien beings. Seemingly they have been altered genetically in the womb. Of course, they was born in normal fashion. Most of them feel that they're out of place. They don't feel close to their parents like a lot of people do. They don't feel close to their brothers and sisters. They feel as if they don't belong on this planet. They can't wait to get away from it. They feel total misfits. And on and on and on. We could talk about this. This girl related this last night right out in the hall out there under hypnosis. How many of y'all are running across this same situation, may I ask? All right, Dr. Harlan, you
I have quite a few people who feel that way. And of course, if you look at some of the daytime soaps and some of the nighttime violence on television and a few other things that go on in this earth, even a perfectly normal human being could feel that this is really the right place for him to be. So if you can imagine a more spiritually minded, perhaps advanced intellectual alien having visited here, maybe as a volunteer, might reflect some of those same attitudes.
In my book, the case that has stirred up the greatest interest from readers and people like that, readers and people who talk to me about it, is the case of Dan. And he was a captain of a space cruiser and retired to the Earth, and he zapped the original inhabitant out of the body, just took over when the person was a child. And now he's in that body, and he's a grown man, of course. And he was a grown man coming in, but he was in his child's body. I know Ruth Montgomery personally, and I'm very familiar with the concept of walk-in. And most people don't have a clear understanding, so just in case the audience has not read her book, a walk-in is a highly developed being who wants to come back to the earth plane in order to carry out some mission or to make a contribution. They don't want to have to go through infanthood and babyhood anymore. And they want to skip those years because what they want to contribute has an urgency about it. So therefore, they make the two souls, the incoming one and the outgoing one, make an agreement that they will switch. Maybe the person who's in the body wants to commit suicide or is dying or something of that sort, but the body can be resuscitated, so to speak. So they make it, it's a mutual agreement. In other words, it's unlike the case of Dan, where he just zapped the other person out. But they don't go through, according to Ruth Montgomery, and who defined this term, they don't go through the infanthood and babyhood, so that may be a completely different thing. And I did find that when her book came out, almost all kinds of people came in to see me feeling that they were walking, because this is a rather kind of glorious thing to be such a highly evolved being that you've got a great contribution. And these people did not fit that description because they were in very bad shape. Usually when the walking came in, they would make an order of a life that was a big mess if the person were committing suicide, for example.
I'd like to add one thing to this. I went, I believe, the whole life expo, and there was a nice little lady on the panel there. She was supposedly, I'm sure was, Ruth Montgomery's original walk-in. She had a big part on the panel. And as I understand it, it's stated in the book by Ruth Montgomery, I haven't read it, that really she didn't write it, somebody wrote it for her. Well, this young lady that was her original walk-in, as I understand it, was the ghostwriter also of this book for Ruth Montgomery and her original walk-in. And we met at a meeting and had a lot in common, got to do extensive talking, and wound up back with her friend at the dormitory they were staying in, and I hypnotized her and found out that it wasn't just the walk-in, but she went into this other phase of it as also being an alien.
I did not run across what I understand to be classic walk-ins in my research. I have a couple things I could say that may be what people are calling walk-ins. One of which is a number of experiencers are reporting an extraordinary sense of not only kinship, but in the bonding sense, but kinship literally with extraterrestrials in the sense of, where these people live is my real home, or perhaps ancestral home. Not that the extraterrestrials are their biological parents, but way back. I am, and I want to really underline this 3 times, very tentatively beginning to move to the position that we as a species represent some biological engineering a while ago by extraterrestrials, and that therefore there may be even a bit of genetic memory represented and enhanced and built upon by the repeat visits now by these extraterrestrials saying, don't you get it? I hear that time and time again. Don't you get it that, why you have this feeling of recognition of us, They don't want to lead the question too much, but it generally boils down to a sense of implied kinship or stated kinship. There is one case where, while I was doing regression to retrieve an abduction or encounter experience, the person spontaneously popped into a past life memory. Now, I don't know quite what to make out of that yet. I'm not a real large past life person. Jury's out on that for me evidentiarily so far. But no classic walk-ins. And the follow-up would be to Dr. Sherner. I think when I was rattling on, I forgot to answer your central question about the figure in the back. And may I ask, on the left in the back or on the right? The taller figure that tends to stand to the back of the examining table with the classic ray abduction. Is there a side that the figure tends to show up more on?
I'd have to look back and see if there were one side more than the other.
Well, in my experience, it tends to be the person's left. I could be wrong, or not necessarily always the case. What is often there is either a very tall so-called ray, taller by a good foot or two than the rest of the folks, or another frequent occurrence is a hooded figure who is wearing a robe with a hood, often the face in shadows, so that the person cannot accurately describe the facial features of the figure, to the extent that people have seen the person turn halfway into the light. They've reported sort of either a tall gray or in 1 or 2 cases a reptoid, I believe.
We've had the hood figures in Legion.
Dr. Turner, did you want to comment on the walk-in question?
Well, I wanted to comment on something that he said. I don't know if I should wait till it's my turn to ask a question, but it brings to mind that if you talked about moving tentatively toward the idea that we may be a product of some genetic work, I think this turns up a lot. And my thinking on this has come from those who said if we are their product, therefore they have the right to do really with us what they will. We belong to them, they created us. And I sort of think about that in children and parent terms here in a human relationship. Yes, the mother and father create the baby, but that does not give them the right to do whatever they want to with that child. The child does reach a point of emancipation and has a sovereign right to certain respect and limits as well. And if we are their genetic creation, I certainly think we may have reached a point where we are 21 now and no longer need parental intrusion without at least asking for it.
Okay, I think we left off questions with Dr. Hart.
I want to make a short comment and then I'll ask a question, Dr. Boyle. I think it's important to distinguish people's feelings that there's a unitary, there's a kind of we're hoping getting over the idea that there's just one group out there and that they're doing this, they're doing that, they're doing this, the other thing. And so to comment further on what this means philosophically, I think is amiss. But I have a question for Dr. Boyle. How many of your people that you talk to, and maybe Giles also, and perhaps Dr. Fiore, actually bring back stories or messages of what the ETs think that the humans should be doing to advance our own civilization, advance our own understanding of ourselves, and perhaps our own spirituality? How many of your people bring back things of that sort from their encounters?
Glad you asked that question. I tried to digest in my publication on 2 pages the messages that have been gotten. In August, I asked this circle of experiencers that I meet with to each go around the room and present what they had gotten from the communications, almost invariably telepathic, with the extraterrestrials they had dealt with. And if you want the nuts and bolts, you can read it in the publication. I'll just give you 2 or 3 excerpts, and that'll have to serve for some more. I got a feeling of wanting to be bonded with the ETs. I found myself missing them. When I was with them, I had a sense of peace, love. You become part of the principal ET individual dealing with you. He becomes your counterpart. Another person said, there will be profound changes in the next 10 years. Even limited nuclear war is possible, but I feel no panic. I get the feeling it will evolve into peace and harmony. The ETs are here teaching me. I must be more trusting, be open, be ready to let go. Another person talked about just saying very simply, some other 3. They communicated it's important to steer the children in the right direction. These are just a few of the kind of messages. I would say that with thorough debriefing of the individual, a good 3/4 seem to come back with a sense of message, and some of the others have a vague sense of mission, which I suspect when it gets unfolded will represent a kind of message as well.
All right, I'll address that's a very easy one, not too hard. I find this almost weekly, continually, all the time. Them wanting to see us perfect our ways, more loving, more spiritual. In fact, I was asked Bob, there's a poem here that's in the book that I want to read after Bob that really answers this beyond all I can sit here and say. So I'll bow out and I'll read this lovely thing.
Which one reads now?
No, he wants to close with it.
Whatever.
You can close with it.
All right.
Each you want to?
I'll respond to that. Sometimes people are given instructions to meditate, to be more involved with ecology, and that sort of thing, things that we've already discussed.
Dr. Turner, would you like to comment on the message being given?
Yes, many of the people in the cases that we've collected have been told they have a mission or a job or a task they're going to have to perform, and the time limit does vary somewhat, so it makes it very hard to know what aspect it is to believe, but many have been told by 1993 they will be switched on to do their jobs. They won't have a choice about it. They will be where they're supposed to be, and they will do what they're supposed to do, not to worry about it, but they won't tell them what the job is going to be. Also, several cases have been told that their mission, or that there is going to be a rescue, if you will, and I really use that term sarcastically, of a certain number of humans that will be removed either from this planet to another planet or to some facility in order for the earth to be purged and cleansed. And I think that's a real nice way to put it, but they're talking about destroying it, basically, what we have on it. For whatever reason, we've ruined it, or there's too many of us for them to deal with, or whatever the situation is. And they vary from person to person. Some have been told that they'll rescue 12,000. Some have been told they'll rescue 1.3 million. It really does vary, so it's hard to know what to believe about that. But they do give these numbers, specific numbers of people who will be rescued. And then we will either be returned to the planet once it's all put back together, or we'll be put on some other kind of planet. And several have been told that they're growing new bodies for us. Those sorts of messages.
Dr. Fiore, your question?
Okay. I'd like to preface my question with a comment. I've been doing this work since about 1975, and I have only found about 5 cases of people who have been forced to have intercourse. And I'm just going back into my memory. 3 men and 2 women that come to mind in all these years. And as I said, I've worked with probably about 400 people. And I feel like I've done a pretty in-depth analysis of their experience. It hasn't been researched, but they've gotten over their problems, and I feel like we've gone from A to Z with it. My question would be, I'd like to ask every other member, the other 4, starting with you, Giles, what is the incidence of sexual abuse that you have come across in your years of working with these people?
That has been perpetrated by the aliens?
Yes, in other words, that the aliens have forced the man or the woman or the child to have sex.
I find that very little, and again, like Dr. Harden said, because I guess I've got too much of a mindset that I look for the better things, I guess, and seemingly I receive them. I do find not too many sexual things. I have found one lady that had numerous ones with the reptilian race, I believe one of you mentioned a while ago. And she went into detail of that. According to her, she had 3 children in outer space. Give the ages of them. I forgot the ages now. One was 4, 1 6, and 1 7. I think she had been picked up and shown these children to her, supposedly, according to her. And there was one particular reptilian that she had numerous intercourses with, and I don't mean to act this way, and she was real impressed. Didn't even cause conflict between her and her boyfriend. I found not so much of the intercourses, but numerous times where they've been picked up and shown the fetuses aboard ship. I guess where there had been intercourses with others. In fact, I've had even related to even spaceships full of fetuses, but not too many intercourses, actually.
I want to speak to this topic because it's very emotionally charged, and I think is an area of what my research tells me is large misinformation. The number of sexual intercourse cases I've run across is 0. Now, that doesn't mean I haven't heard about sex in this context, but let me tell you what I've actually found. The extraterrestrials are very adept psychologically and telepathically in inducing mental visualizations when they wish to, for various purposes. Some of the, may I be so bold as to say, low-lifers, although they're still technologically ahead of us, are still doing ovum and sperm harvesting from time to time, but that's a very tiny percentage of the cases I've run across. The kind of blurred figures you hear out there, I find no corroboration for. What I have found is 2 things. One of which is that a visualization of a sexually appealing person, more likely human-looking than extraterrestrial, although I think one possibly might make a case for the latter, has been presented to the person so that they feel they're in the experience of either having sex with their girlfriend or something like that, boyfriend. And it isn't the extraterrestrial mounting them and having sex with them and passing the girlfriend or boyfriend off as him or herself, but a visualization designed to be stimulating so that sexual hormones rise, and apparently for extraterrestrial breeding and breeding material extraction purposes makes a healthier specimen take. This arguably may be a manipulative kind of way of getting the result, but it does not represent mounted intercourse. In all cases, the methodology is similar to the way we do artificial insemination instruments, and no personal body parts of alien inside. The other thing I've run across, and I think this really needs to get out in the clinical community too, I don't know how many therapists are here. I've run across repeated cases, and I think I'm starting to get that with colleagues, of people who for a long time have thought that they were the victim of incest because they remember somebody coming in their room at night, pulling back the bedclothes, and touching their body, including some very private places, and as best they could tell, it looked like Uncle Charlie or Dad or somebody. And upon revisiting the experience, it turns out two things. I'm not saying all cases, believe me, there's plenty of incest going on, it's terrible, and it needs to be acknowledged and treated. Let no distortion go forth on that. But there are some cases where this is a cloaked memory for an extraterrestrial encounter and palpation kind of scientific, medical, presumably investigative process. And so the extraterrestrial, in order not to frighten the person, took on the appearance of a familiar figure. The other aspect is that while the person may have remembered sexual penetration, when they are asked to notice exactly what's in there, is that a penis in there or not? No, it's too small for that. No, it's too short for that. And it's too metallic-like, it's not, in other words, a penis. So that is a misinterpretation of an experience. Now, these are kinds of highly charged sexual encounters that you can see if someone doesn't get highly skillful analysis of the experience. You go off saying they're out here helping everybody they can get their hands on. I can't talk about anybody else's research. I run across 0 cases of my own.
You assume that the penetration was technical rather than biological, and therefore there wasn't a sexual case. Do I understand you right on that?
I don't know quite what you mean. I don't make any assumptions. I let the people tell me what they see.
But you interpret what they tell you.
No, I'm telling you what they told me.
I think you did. I thought I heard you interpret that you heard sexual material, but you considered 0 cases of sexual intercourse. So if you'd heard it...
I told you what the cases were. They were mistaken incest cases and eroticization visualizations for which there was no physical mounting and body penetration actuality to the visualization.
Okay. But the person felt it was a real experience. The result feeling was real. Right, okay. Yeah, we've had this as well. I agree that sometimes what seemed to have been a human incest episode, and I know of one in particular that's very telling, it turned out not to be human at all. But I think we have to look, on the other hand, those who would say that the memories of sexual encounters in abductees stem from real sexual abuse or incest cases, and these are the masks for them, have to be thoroughly examined, that doesn't really hold up. There are a number of abductees who were sexually abused as children, just like there are non-abductees. But they remember the sexual abuse as well as the abductions. So it doesn't seem to be working as a screen. They have both sets of memories. We also have cases, and I don't know what you would make of this to make it a misinterpretation, where it's the mouth that is penetrated, not the genitals area. And when they get up close and personal and clear their vision and look closely and use the staring technique, they see what clearly appears to be an alien form of a penis. So we do have those cases as well.
I see a little interpretation going on here where a metallic object could be considered a penis in the case of Boyle's remarks. I think people do bring to some of their experiences, some of their own fantasies. I know there's a well-known case being circulated in other parts of the country of a man who's drawn pictures of this alien beautiful lady who seduced him repeatedly and showed him on board a craft thousands of children that he had fathered. What a marvelous fantasy that is. And he was being seduced by this beautiful lady, and that's another fantasy, of course. And then when pictures that were being put on the screen were passed by a panel of people, I mean, I know some people who have fairly good access to the galactic records. They said there are no such creatures as that exist to our knowledge in the galaxy. And the human, the person, there was another anomaly there. So you just have to imagine that, look, if 1% or 5% of the population are sexually fascinated and fantasy prone at the same time, how easy it is to find them. Really, it's just surprising there aren't more, and there aren't more Geraldo type shows exploiting them. Joan Rivers can find all kinds of people like this with a drop of a hat. And maybe she'll get onto this and she'll have a heyday with our stuff too. But I want to get beyond, if I can, this preoccupation. Oh, by the way, let me answer the question about whether I have had people. Yes, there have been 2 people, 3 people who reported, and I do believe they had real sexual intercourse. That they really enjoyed it. It was fantastic. They weren't forced on them at all. And I have various explanations for that, which is to a certain extent hypothetical. But I haven't found anyone, with one exception, who believed that it was forced on them. And then when I looked into that more carefully, it was a confabulation of earthly scene. I never heard of anybody having been forced. And this is over 25 years and maybe 20, 30, 40 people a year. And you'd think that if something like that came up, that I would have seen it. I've never seen a forced rape scene.
Okay, the last question now for the panel, to the panel. We'll start with Dr. Harder and work back this way so we can then Giles on this part.
Well, I do know, and I've in preference to my question, that people do get this sort of message of hope for the world. But I want to go further and say, have there been people who brought back pictures of what kind of things that we could be doing in terms of creating a better world here with our own earthly resources? They have any opinion about what we could do about ecology in more specific ways than just consciousness raising, or is that essentially what they're up to, consciousness raising? That's my question.
Okay. Karla, do you want to take it first?
Just briefly, they have shown pictures of destroying the status quo physically so that we do have to start over. That's about all I can say they offered as a solution.
Dr. Fiore?
I really don't have an answer to that.
Information I have received from the experiencers suggests that the concerns about change, end times, cataclysm have to do with our destruction of the planet and our aggression against each other, not theirs. It's very obvious with their technology that they could conquer us anytime they felt like it, and have not chosen to do so. But they're very concerned about what we're doing to our own planet. And I think they must have a sort of galactic Sierra Club attitude that it's a shame the planet's a terrible thing to waste.
Absolutely, I agree with that 100%. They have told us in more cases that what a beautiful planet here, what we've got, and the way we're destroying it, how awful it is. And I guess this is basically conscious raising, so to speak. They can't understand our hate, our jealousies, our greeds, our wars. And again, we'll go back to the poem later. We'll bring this to the surface. Thank you.
Karla, your question?
Yes, how many of you have had cases in which the abductees have reported being taken not to a ship facility but to an underground facility?
cases in California only this past year have I heard of this picture, and I have tried to establish whether it was a musty odor that these people were reporting, or whether it was just some screen memory for a room. I haven't really been sure about that. There have been many suggestions that some of their hiding places are under the oceans, which would make a very good place to store things. You didn't want the U.S. Air Force to be bombed.
And going into my memory banks, I would say that I can't remember any case particularly, but just offhand, I'd say only just a few through the years, and nothing specific.
I believe I've run across a couple of cases. The one that comes closest to mind is a cave in a mountain, and the experiencer was taken there twice. Car and himself pulled up inside the saucer, and the whole shooting match inside the cave. The saucer opens up, he's extracted, car stays inside saucer. We even have a pretty good idea where the cave is one of these days. I can try to luck knocking on the door and seeing what happens. It's near Knights Ferry, California, but that, closer than that, I do not choose to be at this point.
Charles?
I know a lot of people don't believe in a lot of these challenge sessions. I do, and I'll be the first to admit you have to take it with a grain of salt. But yesterday in a challenge session right up in my room, Ricky Monroe and myself will be on stage here. It's one we done, and it's talking about storing places. The alien went in and described in detail around the world where the bases was, underwater, etc., what sections they were, basically what they've done. And a question I've asked, I don't know how many thousands of questions, they say there's very few pictures of a cigar-shaped flying saucer. And I asked, I happened to think about this, why a cigar-shaped flying saucer? They told me exactly, without stuttering one bit, that this was their transport cargo machines. They wanted to move equipment, huge, just like our vans, our big planes. The cigar shapes was the transport of large, numerous stuff. And went on to what bases they was going to with these, and so much of this stuff, I take it with a grain of salt, but I got a secretary at home that transcribes this stuff. She's not into metaphysics, she's not into UFOs. And the only thing she cares about is a few bucks an hour she gets for the typewriter. She brings this stuff in and she plops it down on the desk sometimes and she looks down at it. She says, this darn stuff just makes sense. And most of it really does, if you'll just try to not be biased and say it ain't so and analyze it. Such a large percent of it, it just does make sense. Thank you.
Dr. Turner, at this point, I want to put the question back to you, if I may. Your experience, what has been reported vis-a-vis underground facilities and people being abducted?
Yeah, we've had perhaps in the last 4 years, maybe 9 cases that have reported being taken into rather large underground facilities. And these are totally unrelated to each other. The cases do not know each other. They're often from different states or are widely diverse geographically. They've described almost identical details about the entrances, about the setup of what goes on in certain areas, and storage areas, processing areas, and so on. And these are coming from what I call virgin cases. They're not into ufology. They don't know John Lear or Jacques Vallée or Bud Hopkins or any of these names. Are not part of their background, so they're not getting this material apparently from an external source, but they're reporting very close similarities and details to these underground areas. And that's why I was interested in what other people were getting as well. And oftentimes they are reporting humans humans involved with aliens working in these facilities. No.
What was the closing question, Dr.?
Yes, if they were square cornered. Very often there are rooms that are human rooms with human doors and human desks within these, but the facilities seem to have been hewn out, so they're not overall square.
Dr. Fiore, your question?
I would like to ask all the other panelists about the shapes of the UFOs that the abductees are taken into. I will just say that there have been only two, and the one is the circular one that I found, and the other is a large triangular one like the ones that appeared over Belgium. And it's just saying that the patient that relayed that told me that a week before that came out in Unsolved Mysteries, and she gave me the exact description with the three lights at each corner of the triangle and the red pulsing light underneath. It was really amazing. And then, of course, it was on Unsolved Mysteries later that week or the next week. So I'd be interested in hearing about that.
I think the literature is pretty complete with the different sizes and kinds.
No, I mean in terms of what the abductions
Mostly people report just the immediate vicinity. I do remember the Travis Walton well-known case. I was taken up in a small craft, but then he was on a large craft. It wasn't very well published. I don't think, unless it was by in his own book, he crossed a large hangar deck in which there were three smaller UFOs parked. To get to a still distant part, this must have been a huge craft. And that's one of the more remarkable accounts that come back.
Dr. Turner?
Honestly, very few report the external description of the craft. They may have seen a craft before an abduction, but they don't necessarily see themselves going up to that craft. There's normally a loss of continuity between the encounter and the room or facility where they're being examined, and many times it seems to be not on a craft, actually. Sometimes they're very messy. You hear about all the nice sterile white light and so on in the areas, and there are those that do turn up, but there's also some very messy, smelly, hurried, crowded areas with tons of equipment that we might call computerized equipment, just crowded and shoved into the area. So it's a variety of places.
Dr. Walton?
I've had a fair number of people, when I really have them slow down and go through the detailed experience, who get a glimpse of the kind of craft they're going up into. The huge preponderance of cases, it's spherical, roughly in the 30 to 50 foot wide. I should say round, not necessarily spherical. Looking from the bottom up, you see round, 30 to 50 feet wide. From being inside, some assumptions that it's domed. In other words, close to the usual variety of plastic saucers. I don't know that I can pull right off of memory variety on that. So,
Thank you. Giles, a question as to types of craft?
Most of mine, like Dr. Ball, there, it's pretty much classical, being the round craft, 30 to 50 feet, but sometimes, like it's also mentioned, they don't see the craft, but sometimes seemingly they do take them aboard the smaller crafts on into the mothership, so to speak, and sometimes the people are just at awe. They only they're under hypnosis and they try to describe it and just say it's humongous, just something like that. Lord knows how big it is. There's one landed at Hastings, Florida one time several years ago, and it was reported by the main real estate agent in town there, and it's quite a thing of its day. Dr. Heineck and all of his staff come down and investigated it, landed in a field out there, and presumably it's some other ship that just came down and landed in plain view in an old field. The man took a Jeep out there proceeded to drive around it in plain view. Said he just had enough guts. He was going up there and asked those folks what did they want. Took his 2 grown daughters with him. It was in a field, used to be roads. It went up and down. Probably he couldn't go 2 or 3 miles an hour. Said he took him 15 minutes to drive around it. He went back and made a normal report on it. He was going to stop, and his daughters started crying and whatever, begging him not to go back home, so he took them back. He reported this craft. This is back a number of years ago at the little place of Hastings, Florida, and Dr. Heineck flew down there, got a helicopter, searched the area, and they really didn't find a whole lot. They found a little stem of something, particle of a limb or something that had something very slick on it, slicker than any oil or grease that we knew of. Didn't find anything, and supposedly as the tale was, Dr. Heineck went back to Chicago and got a whole carload of scientists and taking soil samples and all this. It was quite an endeavor. While they was gone, the thing come back and landed again. And this fellow that done all this reporting, like I said, he was the main real estate agent in town. He was head of the Masonic Lodge, and there got to be so much publicity about this thing that it's on his farm there, and he had his own little real estate development, and I got this in a slide presentation I showed back home. He decided to capitalize on the publicity of this thing, and he hung another sign under his real estate sign, says extraterrestrial landing site. I got a slide of it at home, and they still really didn't find anything. Some company done a little documentary on it. I interviewed and talked to one of the deputy sheriffs that worked the thing, and it's the first time that I'd come across. Apparently he had a little visit for the men in black. It's the first time I'd ever heard of them. This has been 15 years ago. I think I'm being told here in hush up. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Boylan, your question. And our first question.
My question's real simple, Dr. Turner. Could you answer your own question about the different types of aliens you've seen?
That I've seen personally or that we've had reported?
You have reported in your research.
All right, we've had the gray beings that I really don't consider to be aliens, considering they're always under somebody else's control, so I don't know about those. The praying mantis type or insectoid type, which is tall and has the very slim arms, very slim body, and seems to be in charge quite often. Another tall type with round eyes, with a round mouth that at least one individual has been allowed to touch, and has very spongy interior surface rather than teeth, and deeply wrinkled skin, that's a grayish-brown color. Reptilian sorts that are robust, have a scaly type exterior ranging from green to muddy brown with clawed and webbed appendages and quite functional teeth. The ball of light figures that often use either verbal or telepathic communication, and they simply look like a basketball-sized light source. The human-looking blondes, but like Dr. Boylan said, many times, and we've had at least a couple of these cases penetrate enough with and without hypnosis to see that the blonde was a screen of some other sort of being that actually, in the one case the person had memory of without hypnosis, was rather bumpy and purpley and almost slick or wet-looking in reality, and this that had used the beautiful blonde image as a cover. The short gray, the very dark black, slim figures that are often robed or hooded. And one that the person called Mr. Green Jeans because he saw it when he was a little boy and Captain Kangaroo was on, and it was about 2 or 3 feet tall and glowed almost neon green and floated. This is the best description we could get on that.
Thank you. Next question.
I was just curious from the panelists if there was, I was curious about some of the personal characteristics of a lot of the either abductees or contactees and so on. Dr. Turner had made a comment about that our planet, as a planet, we're 21 now, and that they can kind of leave us alone, that we are okay to our own devices. I'm just curious, of the panelists up here, just to signify by raising your hand, are any of you currently smokers now? I was curious if any of the contactees or abductees, do they have what society is considering to be undesirable personal characteristics such as smoking or drinking and that type of thing?
Who are you addressing that question to?
Jim.
Generally speaking, a very healthy concern for health is a part of their life, sometimes taken even to extremes. You might remember the case of John Salter, who had an encounter, I think, 3 years ago, and who, after 1 year, more or less, getting used to the idea, completely stopped a very, very heavy tobacco habit. Apparently that had been something that had been put in his mind by what he believed to be an extraordinarily benevolent and caring group of people.
Would anyone else like to comment on that? Karla?
Yeah, we have people who smoke, people who drink, people who mess around, people who had drugs, people who have never had any of those, people who eat meat, people who don't. The only characteristic, I don't know why maybe that is an offensive characteristic to some of you, any one of those may be, but we don't have any one kind of personality or characteristic that seems to denote the abductee as being somehow different from the general population, except they do seem to be very intelligent and very morally benevolent.
My findings are in agreement with Dr. Turner's.
Interesting question. My research, I found trends. The starting contactee or experiencer tends to be your average cross-section of humanity. White, African American, Chicano, Asians, youngs, old, middle-aged, both sexes, all socioeconomic classes. There's not much of a discriminator there. In terms of lifestyle habits, we have a usual range of people who smoke, drink, etc. But what we notice seems to be happening over time as people kind of mellow with the experience and presumably are being influenced by either thinking about their previous experience or in many cases renewed contact, at least at the telepathic message level, that more and more of the group are moving away from tobacco, away from alcohol use, towards vegetarianism, towards either earth spirituality or Native American religion or something in that spectrum. So there does seem to be some lifestyle shifts that occur as a long-term consequence of contact.
The doctor's just about answered mine. Exception, they do seem to want to become more spiritual. And above all, they become more psychic, so many of them, and they are more health conscious, and basically, other than that, about what he finished saying.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, I'd like to ask all of you, a MUFON investigator in Massachusetts has encountered, and there may be others, well, cases of what he calls dual reference, in which experiences, as they call them up there, when they are on the ship, they slide into another identity or an expanded consciousness in which they identify with or recognize that they are themselves of that ship or of another group of so-called aliens, and that prompts me to wonder if we are not all fragmentary projections of a higher, or I don't want to at all say higher, but of a different vibrating consciousness. But that really, well, I'd just like to know what, if you have found cases of dual reference.
Okay, let's start at the far end, Dr. Hart.
Yes, this is fairly frequent. If it were more prevalent, we hope that there wouldn't be as many problems as we have on Earth. But indeed, people do identify in the way you describe, and maybe perhaps in some way manifest a different personality. I don't believe that some people do, that this represents some kind of being kicked out on the part of some other. I mean, after all, if an extraterrestrial wants to have some kind of a dual occupancy with you, it's only because he's a particularly altruistic and perhaps volunteer, because living on Earth is the dregs, right? They're not here for fun. But there are people who do have some kind of, looks like a kind of a dual attitude. I'd like also to comment on the fact that there are some people who believe that they are extraterrestrials personally, right? And I know there are people who say that. If there were such a person who was a true extraterrestrial among you, the last thing you would hear would be is to say that. So if anybody tells you he's an extraterrestrial, that's the very first thing he'll tell you that he's not. Okay?
I really meant that it's people who felt a different identity or
Yes,
a different
right.
awareness when they were there as opposed to here.
That's right.
Not
When they're there,
anything
perhaps.
like being here and saying,
Right.
oh, I'm an extraterrestrial. I don't mean anything like that.
It may be what you might call a latency, which is brought out under that circumstance.
Dr. Turner?
Yes, we've had some of those cases where they feel like they're part of the crew when they're up there, or for some reason they didn't remember it each time they go back. But one in particular case, 3 women were abducted in New Mexico a couple of years ago and taken to what they all 3 separately described as an underground facility. One was taken away and experienced the typical gynecological exam in a room near a laboratory area. The second person under hypnosis never got past screaming. And the third one remembered going in, walking over to an area, putting on a suit that matched the suits of the aliens there, sitting down at a computer-like machine, and said, I punched in my code and began working. So, and this was not something she thought before or after, and really has trouble accepting even now.
Dr. Fiore?
I've had a number of people who have had that experience where they feel that they're with their own kind, and they long to go home. A lot of that. In terms of percentages, I'd say about 5% maybe, just off the top.
Dr. Bloom?
As I understand the question, I don't think I could report that kind of altered state of consciousness with that nuance to it. I have found a number of times a couple other things that maybe what you're talking about, or I'll just put it on the basis of what people I've dealt with have experienced. One of which is, as Dr. Fiore has said, a sense of kinship, more than quick friendship, but a sense of ancestral kinship. The other thing is people who have had a lot of earth trauma from fellow human beings have developed a readiness to move into an altered state of consciousness, out of body experience dissociated state, as you may wish to call it, and find themselves dissociated, looking over at themselves on the table, etc., because that's the way they've dealt with earth traumas, and that mechanism serves them well in this new setting. But as I understand you technically asked the question, I cannot confirm that.
Giles, your experiences?
I'll have to answer pretty much the same way they do. I've found multiple times they have felt that way, that they even become part of them. I got one man individual, supposedly he was aboard for 9 days, and supposedly it seems they was from a planet that the Mayan people was from, and they even taught him their language. And I know this sounds way out, but the big button, this thing under hypnosis now, sometimes this boy does speak what we think's Mayan. He speaks it fluently. I done one section where I had to scold him to get him out of Mayan and back into English, if that's what he is, and he writes in it. Supposedly he was aboard in 9 days. This is kind of hard to overlook.
Next question.
I have a two-part question basically addressed to the whole panel. First of all, can any of y'all explain why UFO sightings come in rashes and why we have low zone? And have y'all had any reports from my home state basically, which is Georgia, because where I come from, we are currently having sightings and by people every day and every night. Thank you.
Dr. Hart, you want to start?
Yeah, perhaps they moved from to Georgia from Alabama, where you may recall the 5 sightings of about 3 years ago. I'm not sure whether that's some kind of an experiment to determine what a large number of sightings would do to the psychology of a local group of people. I mean, maybe they are very interested and concerned about what would happen should there be a more intense evidence of their actual physical presence. And they might take some place like Fife, Alabama, or Belgium, or some small place where they can have kind of a close observation of the effect. And that might be an explanation of what you observed.
Dr. Turner?
I don't have any explanation that comes out of the experiences in my office, but I just have some hunches. And one would be that the activity is increasing year after year in different areas, and sometimes it subsides, but I think that we are being prepared. All you have to do is look at the contents of the movies and the documentaries, and you can see. It'd be interesting for someone to plot the frequency of movies that are related to UFO and aliens, and it's just increasing and increasing. And I think that it's very significant that E.T. was chosen twice to be shown on Thanksgiving because it had such a huge viewership. So I think that it's a way of getting us prepared. I mean, that's just my own personal guess. It doesn't come out of any kind of finding from my office.
With the people I've worked with, I do not have an explanation for the general flaps, like Belgium and other ones that have had high frequency. I do have one sense of purpose and frequency that is in the future, in the very near future, and that is the content of several people's communications received from extraterrestrials while doing a close encounter. And that's that there will be increasing numbers of sightings and increasing visibility and increasing sort of in your eye kind of undeniable public kinds of sightings mounting in the months and year ahead as part of the conditioning for the open revelation of the extraterrestrials widely among us despite the government cover-up.
I agree with basically the above there. I believe for a number of years that the extraterrestrials, along with our government, is spoon-feeding us in a lot of different ways. Could take 2 hours on that. Like these contacts, I told somebody the other day that I deal with and hypnotize. They're coming out of the, so to speak, the woodwork now. I've had as 4 and 5 different ones a week, and I made the statement that I think it's being changed now from being spoon-fed, and I think there's a little small shovel being used instead. So,
Next question.
This is for Dr. Fiore. I was curious to know if an update on your case study of Dan, what was so anxious to get back on the battle and whether or not his experiences might be used to be, that he might be able to be, if you have any comment, if his experiences here might be useful in some sort of future time as a cleanup operation or something like that.
I haven't seen Dan since I wrote that chapter. We talked on the phone about 6 months later. He was very, even though I had invited him into my office to do that work, because he was not a patient, he benefited therapeutically from uncovering those memories and felt much more at peace with himself. I have no idea as to his future use, but that's an interesting question. Everybody's curious about Dan. I think that he was the star of the book.
Thank you.
Next question.
Okay, I have two related questions. Do any of you know any ways of protecting yourself, your family, from any abductions? And I think that's where the smoking question came from, because my wife had read somewhere that smoking can protect you. In fact, she took it back up for that particular reason. And the next question is, how can you question a child without traumatizing a child about what they may have? If you see some things in their life that makes you think something's happened, is there a way of safely questioning them to find out the truth?
I'll start by answering. I used to be a child psychologist when I first started my work, and that was my original training. I would think that just at home what you could do is, first of all, you just listen very carefully to what your children say, and without asking any leading questions, but just asking questions that would open the door for them to tell you more without any fear of being ridiculed or whatever. And then also you could have them draw. Just ask them to draw pictures of what they saw. And watch their doodles, because they may draw, or their drawings, they may draw pictures of ETs without you even asking. So I just think that that's a form of therapy, art therapy, and that can be very helpful to help them to master those emotions. So that would be the answer to the one about the children. As far as protecting yourself by smoking, tell your wife to stop smoking. She's killing herself by smoking, and she's not protecting herself at all, because a lot of my abductees were smokers. And also, by the way, I would like to add that after repeated abductions, they some of them have given up drugs and drinking too much and are cleaning up their act, so to speak. As far as how can you protect yourself, I'm sorry that I have to be negative about this. I know there is one lecturer who feels that you can use your free will and surround yourself with white light. I don't find that does any good. I'm sorry to report that. But my own feeling is that maybe in the rarest of cases, but as a general rule, and I would say I don't feel that, say, 95% of the people who would attempt to repel these experiences or repel the people or to prevent this from happening by using any kind of protective things, because people have prayed, and when they see the aliens, they start praying, and if they've had these experiences, they remember them, they pray to Jesus and Mary, and they don't get any protection. And so what this does, of course, is they feel God's letting them down, and so it just adds to the whole problem. But I don't know of any way that they can forestall to avoid this.
Go ahead, Rich. Well, to the first question about protection, I guess I'd ask why. It's not nice to answer a question with a question. And to follow up on that, it's sort of like a person trying to get some sleep, and Paul Revere is riding by and saying, the red coat's coming, red coat's coming. He goes to the window and says, shut up, I'm trying to get some sleep. They're here, and they're here for a purpose, and overall, the purpose is very much worth paying attention to. So I have a little trouble getting very enthusiastic with the project of trying to ward them off. Some very high tech's been done, including motion detectors, infrared sensors, and they just simply switch that off if they want to come in. So the military intelligence highest tech stuff isn't worth squat. So I doubt that cigarette smoke is going to be much of an impediment. As to the kids, I've worked with a number of kids and experienced as kids too. It's not so much how do you tell them or shape them. The kid has the experience in the way that they have it already. All it needs is a respectful listening to, some eliciting of further detail. In most cases, I think hypnosis with very small children is not indicated. Other ways of evoking what the experience was, as Dr. Fiore so well said, the classic form of art expression. I found puppetry to work well. Kids can talk through the puppet stuff. They don't have to take ownership of it personally. But the other kids will talk just about the little guys that come at night. And if you're matter of fact about it, kids take their psychological and emotional reaction from the parent cues. If you're screaming and ready to cut your wrist, the kid's going to be traumatized. If you say, well, that's interesting, and what happened next? They're going to get matter of fact about it. I think that may be the most important thing to keep in mind about the kids.
Dr. Hartman?
The paradox is that if you ask somebody who's a true friend and really respects you to leave, he probably will. If you find somebody who's not quite so friendly toward you, he may not hear you at all. So I would suggest that telling somebody to leave is probably counterproductive, or at least not very effective. But I will say that in many instances over a long period of time, I have been able to get into the person's communication with the extraterrestrials that they're familiar with, sometimes channeling, whatever you want to call it, and we engage in a two-way conversation. And frequently, a misunderstanding has taken place that can be straightened out. I could give you many examples in which whatever seemed to be an intrusion or something else has been relieved by a rational discussion. Seems very strange to you, I'm sure. In which people's lives have been essentially improved by better understanding, and furthermore, some kind of insistence on the part of the extraterrestrials for a certain course of action has been deflected when they realize that it's not the best thing to happen. They'll actually listen, believe it or not. They're very rational people.
Well, for those of you who know the answer to why try to get them to stop, I will offer at least one possibility. Neanderthals that we are, we don't like this business maybe, and one thing that's worked to stop a particular encounter when it's the gray beings, even though you may be immobilized physically, is to blast mentally great anger or imagine a bomb going off in their face, and the grays often will leave at that point. That doesn't mean they won't be back the next night or the next week, but you may be able to stop something from happening that night or that particular time using an offensive emotion at them. They seem to like to have fear from us, and they like to have sexual intensity from us, but they're not real crazy at anger that's aimed at them.
And the second part of the question, dealing with children?
Well, I'm not a therapist, so I'm not going to pretend to answer that question. I agree with what Edith has said, that it's mostly in listening and not letting the child feel that you do not believe the child, that they'll be open to talk to you about what happened.
I would like to just say one thing in relationship to what Dr. Borland has said. I've seen traumatized children. I don't work with children any longer, but I have special favors to some of my ongoing patients. I have seen their children, work with them for a while, and or refer them to a colleague. But they have been very highly traumatized. Bedwetting, not having to sleep on the floor next to the parents, not being able to go in the hall, having a phobia, the very same things that happen to adults. So it isn't like these are benign experiences for these children. I mean, they maybe, in some cases, they may be their little blue friends. One person referred to the child as the little blue doctors. But other kids are very, very traumatized, just like the adults are. They have symptoms, terrible symptoms. So it's not something, I mean, I would not want it for my children or grandchildren at all. I mean, if they came to me crying and screaming and saying there were people there, I wouldn't just say, relax, this is for your benefit. Absolutely not. And of course, I would more or less know what was going on. I'd get help for them, and I would just feel horrible that I couldn't stop it from happening. I think that would be the worst thing as a parent to feel.
Giles, did you want to address those two-part questions?
I haven't worked with children very much. I run it on occasion. One little lady I got that I've been hypnotizing for some while, she's been abducted and all kind of things has happened through her, and she brought me one thought, said she thought one of her little daughters, I believe was about 7, 8 years old, had a visitation one night and brought her to me for hypnosis. And sometimes I have fair luck with children above 6 years old. It's not one of my preferences to work with, but anyway, it's on the level they are. As I mentioned, the little girl in particular called them watermelon heads, I guess, talking about the grays, and it was right open and joyful for her. I had one little boy in a channeling session with his father, said that they would start picking him up, and supposedly was to pick him up this particular night. And there was quite a lot of information, and after that, the next night, they was all in my living room, and this little boy was real young. He would sit down and draw one flying saucer after another, draw inside of the flying saucer, make a fairly good drawing of being beamed up, and et cetera, and et cetera. And it's something the way they can express it sometimes.
Thank you. Dr. Harper, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to make sure that the audience understands that many of the people who are reporting these things are reporting them on the basis of people who come to them in trouble. And it would be a real mistake, I think, to call it a to unify the whole thing out there and to make it easier for us to discuss it, to be sure. But if you just talk about people who come to you in trouble and who are traumatized children, I have lots of children who are perfectly happy, and they understand a lot better than their parents. They don't have that reaction at all. I have a 1, 2.5, or 3-year-old, and when she can remember, when she was 2.5, she saw the moon, and she said to herself later on, the moon is going to come down and visit me. And the moon was out in the backyard when she went there at 3 o'clock at night, and she had a very calm, very pleasant, no examination. They just wanted to say hello. Later on, when she was 12, they saw her more. And these are, in my experience, far more typical than the scare stories that come to the attention of psychotherapists.
May I just comment?
Sure.
Since I'm a psychotherapist, many adults, after remembering, a particular abduction, I'll ask them to go back and remember the first one. And it occurred as a child, and invariably it was very traumatic. Now, there are cases in which a kind person or being will come and say, I will see you when you're 12 years old or whatever, and they establish a good relationship. So not all of the cases are negative, but I would say that in doing a regressive hypnotic analysis to the very first one, it definitely was negative. In about 95% of the cases, these kids were traumatized.
Thank you. Next question.
I have a few observations and a question I'd like to address. One to Mr. Hamilton. There's Dr. Hamilton.
No, Giles Hamilton.
Giles. You mentioned the cigar-shaped ship, and I have heard about ships that were so huge that they would be as large as the city of Los Angeles floating above us. I wonder if any of you have had any experience with any reports of something like that.
I've had them reported, I mentioned a while ago, and described it, and said the only way one fellow, he described it, he said the only way I know how to describe it is humongous.
Mm-hmm.
I had them described not as big as Los Angeles, of St. Augustine. I had one described through a channeling session one time that everybody in St. Augustine, Florida could be put in it. I've had them described as 10 miles long, and it's unreal. It's unreal.
Then I had a question for Dr. Turner. In listening to the Billy Goodman show, which you may not be familiar with, it was emanated from KVEG here in Las Vegas from 89 to 90, about almost a year's period before it got shut down because of Global 2000, the Kissinger depopulation plan. And in it, there were calls, people calling up about dismemberment of people and backs of limbs and legs and things. And one girl called up and said that she had been abducted and her left arm was growing longer than her right. And then I have a friend in a desert locality who swears that she has seen people who don't move properly. Their legs and bend wrong, and they bend wrong, and she believes that they're surrounded by these people who are brewing drugs for a CIA-like project.
Is there question like, have I heard this material?
Yes. Are you familiar with any of this material?
Within the cases, and I will limit this to the virgin cases, these are people who were not into ufology before their experiences surfaced or before they began to find out about it. We have several reports of underground facilities where bodies are processed, and we have had very similar, if not identical, descriptions of certain things, not that you would think of if you were trying to make up this description that makes it suspiciously believable that they have seen or have been induced to think they've seen the same sort of place. Whether these are real experiences or false experiences, they are multiple experiences because we have several people totally unrelated reporting these. They have seen bodies being processed, often coming from Arkansas. One said like the chickens at the Tyson Chicken Factory, and could hear the sounds of the bodies being dismembered. Others have, two other people have described seeing human bodies hanging upside down with blood being drained out of them, and one said they were stacked like cords of wood in an area. They have also, two different people have reported seeing humans who seem to be in a zombie-like or catatonic state working on the assembly processing area and did not seem to be doing it willingly. Yes, the underground places have come up in virgin cases, not in UFO fanatic cases, not in people who've read this material. We've also had one where two people were abducted to a facility they were told was a joint alien-human disease control center, and they were given inoculations. They both had partial conscious memory of this when it was over with, and one of them was so disturbed by it he wanted to seek regression help to find out what else happened. The ETs came back to him and said they warned him not to do this, he was not to look into this any further, and if he did, they would kill the other man who was with him, and they described a very peculiar situation in which this death would occur. And he told his friend what message he had received about this, and the man encouraged him to go ahead and try to find out because they were both concerned to know the truth. He did seek regression on the first time when he got back to the state where he lived with this other man. The man was in the hospital and did die within 24 hours in the most bizarre situation that was not a medically induced problem at all, and it matched exactly what the ETs had warned his friend would happen to him if he did seek regression. I know that's the horror stories nobody wants to hear, nobody wants to talk about, and they're not politically acceptable, but these cases are as valid as any other case. Whether there is validity across the board, that's something you're going to have to decide.
Dr. Wolf,
The cases I present to you represent people who I've screened for psychological serious disturbance. And as a result of that, I have 0 cases of such lurid tales. I think the inference there need not be elaborated further.
Well, it's not a lack of evidence, it's not evidence of lack, of course. And I think we have to take everyone's data as it may pertain to something, but not necessarily infer that it's the whole thing that is happening. Now, there are many instances, and I have investigated people who have had some experiences in some of these underground facilities, and they're not very nice experiences. And they have involved certain kinds of extraterrestrials, and according to their testimony, humans. And it's the humans that are doing the bad stuff. Not that they're not in some kind of collaboration, but I want us to make sure that if we get into this wild stuff, that we realize that it may not be anything but it's all typical, and it may be something that we as humans need to ourselves face, because it's not, these people are being paid out of black budgets, right? And I think it's time that perhaps one of our new presidents is encouraged to look into some of the things that our own humans are doing and making it appear in many instances to be alien malfeasance.
I'd like to add one more thing here.
And I want to rebut just a second.
Dr. Turner made a very interesting statement that this was just as valid as anything else that was presented. And she was not claiming that it was valid or invalid. And I think that you have to look And all that we've told you, as you just have to see whether it fits right for you. You cannot take any of this as facts. Some things are facts that we're telling you, but when it comes to what is remembered under hypnosis, that's why I use the term clinical validity. If somebody has a symptom and they remember something and they get over the symptom, to me it's a clinical validity, but it still could be a fantasy. It just doesn't make sense to me as a fantasy. But in other words, what she said could be a fantasy. I mean, the man did die. But on the other hand, it could be completely true. And I think you have to look at everything that we say up here in that light.
Certainly there will be records, wouldn't there?
Yes,
The
of course,
hospital.
and I would like to absolutely resent, Richard, the implication that I can't tell a deranged person from a sane person. This person in particular that we're talking about is a second-in-command city official of a large area. He is certainly competent in every other form of his life. There is no indication of any mental illness. There are medical records to go with this. He absolutely will not go public with the story because he is frankly scared to death. In the other cases of the people reporting the underground facilities, as I said, if you want to give me a criteria to judge their mental capacity, I'll be happy to apply it, but I hope you would think I would know better. I mean, I don't have a PhD in psychology, but I've certainly had a training in ascerning and discerning material and people that I would not work with anyone I suspected of mental disturbance. I would send them to a therapist. And none of these cases I've talked about qualify as mentally disturbed.
Go ahead. Rebuttal of rebuttal. Only a qualified psychotherapy professional can discern people's psychological states. It's not as simple as they're schizophrenic or they're well. There is a, for example, delusional disorder representing one narrow band of delusional thinking where everything else about the person is perfectly high functioning. Arguably, certain people have headed Fortune 500 corporations and perhaps headed the United States as president with such a disorder and function very well from many criteria of functioning. The other thing I should say to this is psychological disturbance does not just include delusional states and other such clinical entities. As I said further, the evidence, I think, is mounting that there is a serious black operations, probably military intelligence, mediated effort to stage pseudo-abductions and pseudo-alien chambers with the most god-awful stuff, of which I'm sure these reports represent just a sample, designed to peddle the psychological warfare agenda that the aliens are evil and we need to crank up the Star Wars weapons and blow them out of orbit. I cannot show you the classified documents to prove this. I think the evidence will continue to mount. But what I have seen so far from people inside government, including victims, is that such is going on and accounts for much of the dark alien worst case scenarios.
Moderator's prerogative here, please. Are you not giving at all the possibility that the particular case that Dr. Turner just cited could have happened? It seems as though it's going a little bit beyond an educational program, a covert educational program, if in fact there has been a very high strangeness death associated with this.
Yeah, there have been more than one.
Well, I don't.
I mean,
What can I say? The covert folks, killing somebody does not give them pause if the stakes are high enough.
I see. Okay.
There's certainly not a criterion that it can't be covert ops.
All right, okay, so then my understanding is that you're saying, yes, certainly this could have happened, but you don't particularly think that it's alien influence.
Well, I don't rule out a few criminal elements in the lower aliens working with criminal elements on our side, but I take exception that that is being pandered about as the representative case or the very large percentage case of what's going on.
Okay, fine. That clears it up for me. Thank you. Dr. Harvey?
I would also echo that we don't talk about it very much because the evidence is a little bit fragmented, but it's getting more solid. And that evidence that there is one group of what Dr. Boylan calls the low life of the universe is working with some of the lowlife of the U.S. government. And who they are, of course, they won't tell you. They don't even, but there's a $35 billion black budget, and that's that's enough to cover a lot of activities. But I only want to make sure that we understand that this is not a unitary thing. This is not something you can blame the aliens for. In fact, if 95% of them are actually, they abhor this whole thing, and perhaps they'll have something that they can do about it from the other side. But we've got to think about what we can do about it from our side. We've got to get this world in order. This is just a, perhaps even this is a small point relative to the other things we have to do about controlling population, ecology, and many other things that they are trying to encourage us to do, to encourage us to take on a more spiritual and loving attitude towards each other. These are the main issues I think we have to address. And this other stuff is a sideshow. It's very serious, and it's very serious to the people who are being involved, but I shouldn't wish us to think that this is something that is essentially central to what we really want to talk about.
I wouldn't like to leave the impression, as I think somebody might have, that I think all the alien contact is negative. I have never said that, and I don't believe that. And the cases that have had some definitely negative things happen have also the same people had positive things happen. I do think there's more than one group at work here. What I'm trying to do by pointing out this other side of it is balance the picture a little bit, because you get a whole lot of how wonderful the aliens are, and you get very little about the other side of it, and both things are as valid, one as the other. And to say, why should we want to stop them coming in, for instance? Well, you don't know when the door opens or the psychic door opens which one's coming in. We need to know what all sides of these aspects include. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Next question.
The first question, it's been my understanding that the Greys, the so-called Greys, are here doing the genetic experiments with us primarily to create this hybrid race, being that they are more technical and lack some of the emotion that we have. They're trying to create some kind of a master race, or a race that can have the best of their qualities and the best of our qualities. And I'm just curious as to what your understanding of this is, what your views of this are.
Are you addressing it to a specific
I'm
member?
sorry, yeah, any one of the panel members.
Okay, so we can start at the end and work this way. The Gray's purpose.
Well, first of all, we're making a certain amount of inferences. We're making hypotheses on the basis of very limited information. That there would be hybridization makes sense to some people who don't know very much about biology and how many millions of data, how many millions of base pairs there are in the human genome. The Human Genome Project is beginning to appreciate it's a fantastic problem. Now, to hybridize human physical bodies, fantastic problem and hardly worth it. But if you want to improve a person's psychology and making him into a more loving person, more psychologically capable of dealing with things in a positive way, that might be a hybridization of a certain kind that's relatively easily effective. Right? That makes a lot more sense to me than that there should be this crazy physical hybrid system, which is biologically and technically not necessarily impossible, but so far so difficult that it doesn't seem to be any worthwhile. I mean, after all, humans are perfectly well adapted to our environment here. The oxygen does not smell bad to us. Nitrogen smells good.
I expect I'm meaning primarily from their purpose and why we're there.
But you see, you're asking a question about their purpose, about something we don't even know is happening, okay? So you can't you can't make an inference about something you're not sure is actually true, okay?
I guess I was just curious about things I had heard.
In just about every case of a CE4, the eggs or sperm or a fetus is taken, and even if the person is immature, like if they're a 9-year-old boy when this is happening, obviously I mean, it seems to me that that would be an immature sample of sperm. But they obviously are taking these eggs. It seems to be the only thing they're taking. Well, they take a little bit of the skin, and so they're either studying us to study the development. As somebody made the point, they know all about us anyway, but I'm not sure. I mean, that's the researchers' inference. But what I do find is that they do indeed take eggs, sperm, fetuses. I've also had people who have been taken back to the ships and shown hybrid babies, and you're going to meet one of these people. My experience, I brought one, we'll be talking about that today. So at least in one case that we've been seeing today, this has happened, and my memory serves me, there have been plenty of others too. Now, why are they doing this? First of all, I don't know whether we can believe what they tell us. And secondly, it would seem to me that if they are taking the eggs and the sperm, maybe I'm a little paranoid, but I think they're creating the ultimate spy, because they've got a human being. And they can do a test tube baby and have a human being that would be indistinguishable from us, raise them in that culture and put them into our culture. Their bodies would be adapted to this culture. Maybe they'd be in some kind of sealed environment there, but they would be a wonderful spy. I mean, this would be great. Since all of our governments have spies in every other place, why can't they have some spies? So that's one thing. And why they're doing the hybridization, I don't know. There's some kind of theories that they don't have emotions, and they can bring emotions in, or they're weak and they need our genes. I don't know. I mean, that information is not clear, but that it is being done seems clear to me. I said there's some things that are theoretical and some things that are fact. And if this business, if anything that comes out under hypnosis can be valid, I do find that this is being done routinely.
Rich, the Graysburgs.
Well, first of all, there's a number of races or different source types that could arguably fall under the general flabby moniker of the Greys. So we've got that problem. Multiple presumed star system origins of folks that may look vaguely similar. That's just one part of the problem. I do not find in my research that the majority of cases involve reproductive product specimen taking. There is a significant minority of cases in which that does occur, the purposes of which can be inferred. First of all, sperm and ovum are a fine example of DNA. They embody a very classy form of a sample of the entire human being, obviously. That's babies come from why they resemble their parents. There does seem to be among certain of the races that are relatively at the low end of the evolutionary spectrum some fertility product processing. It seems to go two ways, one of which is to tune up the next generation of kids. This is partially information, partially inferred by perhaps modifying the genetic code of the fertility product and then reinserting it in the contributors so that their subsequent children will have enhanced qualities. Another line of endeavor appears to be farming these products possibly for use on off-planet subsequent fertility. A third case seems to be borrowing these products, reinserting them, having the person, woman in this case, begin a gestation period, and then at the first trimester, removing the fetus for further growth in a off-planet site for purposes we are not clear about.
I'd like to just add something for a few moments here. I did a regression in Berlin on a reporter for the International Human Symposium. And he was taken aboard a craft, was forced to have intercourse with his girlfriend. she got pregnant, the baby was taken, and he was very disturbed and started to cry and all that sort of thing, and then later was told by them that this person, that his child would be a boy, and it would be very helpful. It'd be a great contribution to mankind. And so he felt so much better. And he really felt good. So we went the whole gamut in that regression. But in other words, I did want to say that besides maybe having them as a spy, which is my thought, that coming out of that regression was that this child would be put back here as a plant. He would be a human child, but he would be very, very helpful to the world.
Charles, did you have a comment on that?
No, not really. I can't add a whole lot to this because, like I said, I've only dealt in the gray stuff a little bit for the last year, and I have one woman, I don't know why, apparently in her shin down there. I've got a slide of it at home where they've took out a particle of bone, and I'm finding, I don't know if they finding out, a lot of times, particularly in women under the hairline, we find in implants. It looks something like a birthmark. It's not in one particular concentrated piece. It's flaky. It's covers usually an inch, sometimes 2 inches, like a light birthmark, and it's not all red. It's kind of mingledy like, and this seems to be the ones that they usually channel through. Whenever I find this back of the neck, they usually will make mental contact, and that's about all I have to add.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have run out of time. I'm sorry for the one yes and no.